The new camp rules were still pinned to the notice board when the first German prisoner tore his copy in half, and before the guards could stop him, dozens of men refused the roll call, ignored the work whistle, and blocked the barracks doors with benches, forcing the commandant to send an urgent report up the chain because Eisenhower's order had not just changed the camp schedule. It had opened a fight over who still had authority behind the wire. The order arrived before breakfast in a sealed army envelope, and the camp clerk typed copies while the guards changed the morning schedule on every board near the barracks. The new rules ended private prisoner courts, required all complaints to pass through American officers, and removed the old barracks leaders who had been using rank to control other prisoners. When the commandant read the notice through the interpreter, several German non-commissioned officers stepped forward at once and demanded that their internal discipline remain untouched. The commandant refused the demand and ordered the men to report for roll call by barracks number instead of military rank, which turned a paper notice into an open challenge. One prisoner tore the order from the wall, ripped it in half, and dropped it at the interpreter's feet while other men shoved benches across two barracks doors. The guards moved quickly but did not charge, because the commandant wanted every refusal recorded before the camp became a fight that could not be explained on paper. The breakfast wagon stopped outside the kitchen yard. The work truck waited empty near the gate, and the mail clerk locked the post sacks until every man had been counted. The refusing prisoners believed the camp would bend once food, letters, and work details were delayed, but the commandant ordered the rest of the compound separated from the blocked barracks. By mid-morning, volunteers from other barracks accepted the new rules and moved to the parade ground, leaving the defiant group trapped behind its own benches. The first conflict ended when the commandant sent a report to higher headquarters, naming the ringleaders and stating that Eisenhower's rules had been refused inside an American POW camp. Are you enjoying this deep dive? Most people don't know this side of the war. If you're one of the few who values true history, subscribe now and help us grow this archive. The escalation began after noon, when military police arrived with extra fencing, flood lamps, and a second interpreter trained to question prisoners one by one. The commandant ordered the blocked barracks opened from the rear fire exit, and the first group of prisoners was marched into a temporary enclosure beside the storage sheds. Inside that enclosure, the former German barracks chief tried to issue orders, but the guards removed his armband, his notebook, and the pencil he used to mark prisoners who disobeyed him. That small act changed the mood faster than shouting, because every man saw that the old rank system no longer protected anyone inside the wire. The camp doctor then walked through the regular barracks and found two prisoners with bruised faces who claimed they had fallen, but another prisoner quietly pointed toward the men who had enforced the old rules at night. The commandant used that discovery to widen the investigation, ordering searches of footlockers, mattresses, and hidden floorboards for lists, homemade clubs, and stolen ration slips. The search uncovered a secret punishment record written in German, with names of prisoners who had talked too freely to Americans or accepted work details without permission. The major in charge of the military police sent the record to the office and ordered the ringleaders removed from the general population before they could destroy more evidence. The defiant prisoners shouted that the Americans were attacking German honor, but the rest of the camp now saw the refusal as a shield for men who had been ruling other prisoners through fear. By evening, the new camp rules had become more than a schedule change because they had exposed a hidden government inside the barracks. The commandant sent a second report up the chain, explaining that the refusal was no longer only disobedience, but an attempt by prisoner leaders to keep control after Eisenhower's order stripped it away. The major consequence came the next morning, when the camp posted a list of 24 prisoners removed from leadership positions and reassigned them to a guarded isolation block. The ringleaders were not beaten or displayed, but their names were crossed from the barracks rosters. Their mail was held for review, and their canteen privileges were suspended pending investigation. The remaining prisoners were ordered to elect new spokesmen by barracks, and this time the vote had to be done in front of American officers and the interpreter. At first, no one raised a hand, because the old leaders stood behind the fence watching from the isolation block, but the commandant ordered the election to continue until every barracks had a legal representative. A quiet prisoner named Bauer stepped forward from Barracks 4, signed the paper, and agreed to speak for men who wanted food, letters, medical visits, and work pay restored. That decision opened a path for others, and by noon 4 new spokesmen had signed the roster while the isolation block lost its power one name at a time. The commandant then restored breakfast to compliant barracks, opened the mail sacks, and allowed the medical wagon to enter, making the cost of continued resistance visible to everyone. The isolated leaders tried to answer by refusing their own meal trays, but the doctor recorded the refusal as voluntary and ordered the trays removed without argument. That response denied them the dramatic punishment they wanted, and the camp moved forward without stopping for their protest. In the afternoon, the new spokesman met with American officers and requested protection for prisoners who had been threatened during the old barracks courts. The consequence became permanent when the commandant signed an order banning secret prisoner trials, private punishment lists, and rank-based commands inside the compound. By nightfall, Eisenhower's rules had not only survived refusal, they had begun replacing the hidden camp authority with written records, elected spokesmen, and American-controlled discipline. The reversal began when the commandant received a surprise inspection order from headquarters, and the prisoners expected higher officers to soften the rules before the camp became harder to manage. Instead, the inspection team arrived with copies of Eisenhower's directive and asked to see the bruised prisoners, the secret punishment record, and the isolation block. The former German barracks chief believed the inspection would give him a chance to accuse the Americans of dishonoring captured soldiers, so he demanded permission to speak. The senior American officer allowed it, but he also ordered the interpreter to read the secret punishment list aloud before the entire inspection board. Name after name crossed the yard, and prisoners who had stayed silent for weeks heard their own punishments spoken in public, including stolen food, forced standing, and threats against families back in Germany. The reversal landed when the inspection officer announced that Eisenhower's rules were not being withdrawn, because the refusal had proved exactly why the rules were needed. He then ordered the isolation block leaders transferred for formal review, while the compliant prisoners would receive restored work pay, regular mail, and the right to report intimidation directly. The old leaders had expected the Americans to negotiate with them, but the inspection turned their refusal into evidence against them. Bauer and the new spokesman were handed printed complaint forms, and the commandant ordered a locked box placed outside the infirmary so prisoners could report threats without passing through barracks leaders. The camp watched the box being bolted to the wall, and that metal box became a stronger symbol than the torn notice because it gave ordinary prisoners away around the men who had controlled them. By sunset, the reversal was complete because the new rules no longer looked like an American experiment, but like a direct answer to the fear hidden inside the camp. The inspection team left with the secret record, and the old leaders were left facing something worse than anger, which was a system that no longer needed them. The final irreversible event happened 2 nights later, when a fire broke out in the isolation block laundry room, and smoke rolled under the doors before the alarm bell rang. The guards opened the outer gate and pulled prisoners into the yard, while the camp doctor counted the isolated men and found one missing from the group. A military policeman forced open the laundry door and discovered the former barracks chief near the back wall, not trapped by smoke, but holding burned scraps from the secret record he had tried to destroy. The fire had failed to spread, yet the act changed everything, because the refusal of rules had now become destruction of evidence inside a guarded American facility. The commandant ordered the barracks chief handcuffed, separated from the other prisoners, and taken to the office under armed escort while the fire crew soaked the laundry floor. The next morning, a transfer truck arrived before breakfast, and the ringleader was placed inside with 2 other men accused of threats, record-keeping, and witness intimidation. No speech was given, and no prisoner was allowed to gather near the gate, because the commandant wanted the transfer handled as a final administrative act rather than a last performance. The truck left for a stricter detention compound, and the camp clerk removed the 3 names from the main roster in ink that could not be erased. After the gate closed, the new spokesmen were called to the office and given the final version of the camp rules with Eisenhower's directive attached to the front. Each spokesman signed beside his barracks number, and copies were posted again on the same boards where the first order had been torn down. This time no one ripped the paper away, because the men who had used fear to stop the rules were gone, and the prisoners who remained understood that the old camp government had ended. 3 days later, roll call began by barracks number. The complaint box stayed locked beside the infirmary, and the work trucks left on schedule without anyone asking permission from the old ranks. The new rules did not make the camp peaceful, but they changed who could give orders inside it. When the clerk opened the ledger that evening, he drew a final line through the transferred prisoners' names, posted the signed directive under glass, and left the torn copy in an evidence folder that no prisoner would touch again. Thank you for spending this time here. If these quiet, true World War II stories matter to you, subscribing helps this channel continue.